I feel fine. It doesn't sound like it, I know, but I have plenty of energy. I know a lot of you didn't get much sleep last night. I heard people roaming around 1, 2 o'clock in the quad where I was at. So, when you're young, you can do that. When you get a little older, you need at least 4 hours of sleep to get by. So, at any rate, I'm glad to be back again. Somebody asked me this morning if my wife accompanies me on my travels. I was trying to think this morning how many overseas trips I've made. I think I've made over 50 trips to all these different countries I've been to. And no, my wife has never accompanied me on any of these. Her response to that would be, why would I waste vacation time when I have to live with you all the time anyway, just to hear you speak? And I don't know that I would want to bring her along, because then she might be tempted to tell you what I'm really like. That might not be good. She has coined a phrase that she feels describes me, and it's excessive personality disorder. I'm kind of beyond an extrovert. I just can't help myself in talking to people. I just like to talk to people. I make friends wherever I go, and that's just who I am. My wife and I have been married for 41 years this year, and she's a remarkable woman. I was sharing at dinner table, breakfast this morning, some of the things she's been through, and she's quite a remarkable woman. And I can literally count on one hand, 41 years now, the number of disagreements or arguments we've had in our marriage. I've known my wife since she was 9 years old. Didn't marry her when she was 18. Come on, seriously. I did marry her when she was 18. I did wait till her dad would let me marry her when she was 18. So, at any rate. So we're going to move on in talking about community. Yesterday we sort of began to talk about the need for it, how our culture works against it, how in some respects the idea of how we think about church works against it. And we did the 14 questions. I hope that was an eye-opener for you, where we kind of saw that in some ways you and I are all broken. We all have junk, we all have issues, we all have difficulties in our lives, and we need a place and relationships where we can relate and connect to begin to heal and work on those things in this context of one anothering. And it was interesting, I thought, that the verses you had this morning dealt with that phrase, one another. And I kind of said this is the context of community that we're going to think about is being devoted, preferring, caring, admonishing one another, all these different phrases that are found throughout the New Testament. I want to add another one this morning. I think it's in your notes. I want to think of community in terms of our common life in Christ. And the key word there is in Christ. Our common life in Christ. Our community, our relationships, whether it's in the church or as men, need to be centered around Jesus. And you may think, well, that's just an obvious implication. That's an obvious truth. But it's not always practiced. Community is not just for ourselves or not just for our churches. Some churches promote themselves, we're a friendly church, we're a happy church, we have small groups, come. And you get the idea that this is a marketing tool to get people to come, that they'll develop friendships, they'll have relationships. It's almost like a self-help group, and that is great. I'm all for that. I'm all for us talking about our lives and everything like that. But Jesus needs to be the center of our community. He needs to be the one that we focus around. We can't base our community on our faith, on our doctrinal statements. I know you guys are a part of Converge. The guys that I work with in my ministry, Foundations Global, we work out of a Converge church in Phoenix, Arizona, Sun Valley, big church. The president of your denomination used to be the senior pastor there, Scott Ridout. I wish I could say I knew him well, but he knows who I am, so I can't really, say, well, I know the president of your denomination. He's a good friend. Can't do that. But we can't base our community on our doctrinal statements. We can't base it on our faith. We can't even base it on the Bible. Okay? If you do that, you run the risk of basing your community around rules and regulations and lists and things like that. The Pharisees knew their Bible, which was the Old Testament, better than you and I will probably ever know the New Testament. They had it memorized. They knew it backwards and forwards. They missed a lot of the heart of the Old Testament, unfortunately, but they knew their Bible, and yet they were the ones that Jesus over and over got angry with, castigated, and got upset with because they missed the heart of the Old Testament. They knew it backwards and forwards, but they missed the heart of it. One of the things that I do is I write. I mentioned that. And I worked for a ministry, Teen-Ed International, for 12 years, where we wrote materials for the churches that we work with. And you get out in the third world, and you just can't go to bookstores and buy books. Now, Pastor Joe probably has a big library. At one time, I owned 3,000 books. I buy about 50 books a year. I'm a professional Christian, so to speak. I read a lot. I read blogs on the internet. This is what I do. This is my life. But you get out in the third world, and books are expensive. I mean, you get out in Cameroon, and where are you going to find a commentary on the New Testament? Seriously. Even if you could find one in English, it's going to be $65 for a one-volume Matthew Henry's New Testament commentary. That would cost you about $20 in the States. So I had to write, one of my assignments was to write a New Testament commentary for our pastors. It took me 6 months. I would go to work every day at our church. I have an office, and I'd spread out all these commentaries and Bible dictionaries before me, and I was plowing away, and I went through from Matthew 1:1 to Revelation 21 or 22, whatever the last verse is where it says, "Even so, come, Lord Jesus." I went verse by verse. I wrote introductions to each verse, difficult passages. I broke each book down into Bible studies so you could teach through the entire New Testament in small groups if you wanted. And at the end of that time, I was lost and gone. I didn't realize it till later. My wife realized it right away. I had spent 6 months academically studying the Bible, and I was as dead spiritually as I'd ever been in my life. I was lost and gone. And it hit me finally, that's no way to approach the Bible. I know you have to do it academically to write this kind of stuff, but man, that was a tough period in my life. We want to base our community around the person of Jesus. So I want to do a quick exercise here. Do we have some Seahawks fans here today? I need three or four of you. Just raise your hand if you're a Seahawks fan. Okay. Anton, is it?
Yeah.
And Scotty, come on up. Come on up. Somebody else, four of you. Anybody else? Another Seahawks fan.
Where's Andy?
Come on up. You guys stand right over there. Just stand right over there. Now, how many of you work for Microsoft? Okay, I need 3 of you. Come on, just if you work for Microsoft, stand over here. 1, 2, come on. I saw it. Come on. Now, how many of you have 4 children? Anybody have 4 children? Anybody have 3? How many of you have 3? Okay, come on up. Come on up. Where's the other one? Joe, you can come on up too. You have 4. Anybody have more than 4? Okay. So you guys go over there, the ones with the kids. And I want you to spend 3 minutes. You guys talk about the Seahawks. Just get together. Talk about how they're going to lose to the Patriots again this year. Too soon? Is it too soon? Really, guys? And you guys talk about your work at Microsoft, how Apple's actually a better product. You guys talk about it. No, just for like 2 minutes. Just talk. Okay? Just talk. And there's a point to this. It's just not for fun. Okay? I'll take a sip of water. We have any Apple guys here? No Apple guys here? Seriously? How many Patriots fans? Besides me?
It's just me and Brian, that's it.
That sweater looks like a Seahawks sweater.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? I know. I don't like Pete Carroll because he used to coach for USC, and I'm an Oregon fan. So those woes way back. So you notice that they're just talking and having a good time and being guys and hanging out, right? Now this has a point. What were we talking about? Integrating Jesus into our community. Okay, that's good enough. You know what this is? You know what this is? This is the lobby of most churches after a Sunday morning service. Guys talking about their families, guys talking about work, guys talking about sports. So we just spent an hour singing to Jesus. Pastor Joe gave a great sermon. I'm sure you're on Galatians, right? You're going through Galatians, is that right? Gave a great sermon on Galatians. Yet when we get out in the lobby, what do we talk about? Family, work, and sports. Is that true? True. It is true. Okay, thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Give them a big hand. And I am as guilty of this as anybody, but I have changed. So, one of the things I do now is I write books, just for catharsis mainly. And I hit a place in my life where I was not happy with my relationship with the Lord Jesus. And I felt I had plateaued, and it was not what I was experiencing was not what I was reading in the New Testament. So I wrote a book about a pastor who had lost his relationship with Jesus. I know pastors, that's what I do. So I wrote a book called Invisible Jesus. How Jesus had become invisible in most churches. And the tagline, one of the taglines to the book is, "Tell me something about Jesus." So I use this every now and then. When I'm with people, I will just say, "Tell me something about Jesus." So I was with a guy in Costa Rica, a missionary, guy I've known for 20 years, and he's read my books. I've known him for a long time, and so I was staying at his house. This would have been the last time I was down there in July, I think, or June. And so I worked this into the conversation. Excuse me. Just tell me something about Jesus. And you know what he said? Well, I just read in Luke chapter 8 how Jesus did this, and I'd never noticed that before. And my heart just sank. That was not telling me something about Jesus. That was telling me something about that he read in the Bible that struck him as new. And as guys, we have difficulty sometimes expressing not only our love for our wives and love for our children, but certainly our love for Jesus. And so one of the things I would really pray that God impresses on your heart is that when you think about community and experiencing community and relationship together, that you have to find a way to make Jesus the center of it. Because I've been on the other side of that, where Jesus was invisible to me, he was invisible to my church, and he was invisible to my friends. We talked about him, we prayed to him, we did lots of other things in his name, but he wasn't real. And it took me writing Invisible Jesus to get to the place where I could begin to express and not feel like I was the only one out there who would be able to say, yeah, I love Jesus. He's everything to me. He has given me meaning, purpose, fulfillment in life. He's the reason I live, and I would do anything and go anywhere and be anything for him. So I hope you would be able to say the same thing. And that little exercise is kind of fun, but it has a point to it, doesn't it? So I hope now you won't be in church tomorrow, so I hope a week from Sunday, after the sermon, and you go out in the lobby, that you're all, well, what should I say? And, should I say something about Jesus? I know that some of the guys will remember what Bill said. I hope that thought occurs to you, and that the tagline, "Tell me something about Jesus," has some meaning and some refreshment in your life. So let me tell you about this church I know that is on the same principle or same illustration. Now, if I mentioned this church, you would all know it. If I mentioned the guy who founded it, you would all know it. Famous person, famous church, doctrinally pure, went through some real difficulties and hung in there for a lot of years. About 40 to 45 years old, and had sent out a lot of missionaries and done some great works. If I mentioned some of the people who had worked in that church, you would know them. They're one of the few churches that actually practices church discipline, and they removed people from their fellowship who they would have considered heretics. And they labored, and they were patient, and they did lots of things. But there was a problem. Like the pastor in Invisible Jesus, they had left Jesus. And you know how I know that's true? Because Jesus wrote about it in Revelation chapter 2. Revelation chapter 2, he's writing to the Ephesian church. You've all heard of the Ephesian church. You've all probably read the book of Ephesians. You know who started the Ephesian church? Apostle Paul. You know who worked there? Apollos, Aquila, Priscilla, Timothy, Titus, Silas. Yet 40 years later, Jesus says to this church, to the angel of the church at Ephesus, write, these things says he who holds the 7 stars in his right hand, who walks in the midst of the 7 golden lampstands. I know your works. They were doing stuff. Your labor. That means they were persevering. It was difficult. Your patience. You cannot bear those who are evil, and you have tested those who say they are apostles. They're doctrinally pure and not. You found them liars. You've persevered. There was some persecution there, if you remember from Acts chapter 18. Let's see. You have persevered, patience. You've labored for my sake, and have not become weary. This is the church I want to attend so far, don't you? It's a good church. But then Jesus says, nevertheless, I have this against you. You've left your first love. You have left your first love. So imagine, they gather in the homes or wherever they were meeting, and they have their worship, and they have fellowship, and they have communion, and they get out afterwards, and what are they talking about? They're talking about the Seahawks. They're talking about work. They're talking about their families. Yet they were doing everything that they should be doing as a church, but they were talking about the Seahawks. They were talking about their work, and they were talking about their families. And the terrible thing is, they didn't even know it. And this can happen to us. So I just want to bring that up. When we talk about community and relating to each other, connecting with each other, being with each other, supporting, all these wonderful things, we have to find a way to bring the Lord Jesus integrate into everything we do. Because we'll miss out on blessing, we'll miss out on fulfillment, we'll miss out on joy, and we'll miss out on the strength and wisdom He'll give us to be able to help each other. Okay, I want to talk about some words now that in a positive way describe what authentic or true community would look like. And I think these are in your notes there. We'll go by them one by one, and I'll give you some illustrations I think that will be helpful. First of all is vulnerable. We want to be vulnerable with each other. So you go to dictionary.com, you type in the word vulnerable, what do you find? It means you're open to risk or injury. You're vulnerable. You're going to take away this shield that we have as guys that we keep up to say, yeah, I've got it all together, I'm fine, don't worry about me. Let's think about somebody else. I have it all together. And you're going to say, yeah, I'm just like you. We have a phrase in our church called me too. Me too. You have that? Me too. And we stole it from a church in Denver, so it's not original with us. But still, it describes that we're just like the people who visit our church. People who visit our church, like I've mentioned to you, are mainly unchurched people. We don't have barriers between us. We accept anybody who wants to come in through the door. I've mentioned, what other evangelical church that you know of would have 4 gay guys who continually attend? And our pastor has preached on traditional marriage twice. We don't change the content of what we do, but we're accepting, we love people, and people sense that about us. So we have people attend who are in no way Christians, yet there's something that keeps bringing them back week after week, or a week, skip a week, come back, skip 2 weeks, like that, Let me tell you a story about my surfing buddy, Mickey. I told you I've been a surfer most of my life. I have a friend that I grew up with, we both grew up in Southern California, surfing. And I would like to think that we didn't know each other in Southern California. We met at Multnomah University where we went to study the Bible. And I would like to think that maybe sometime we were surfing by each other in California, we didn't know it. That'd be a nice thought, that maybe at San Clemente or Huntington, where we both surfed during the 60s, that we were right next to each other and we didn't know it. But we ended up at Multnomah, and we sort of quit surfing when we had young kids. In Oregon, the water's freezing cold, but we both started taking it up again in 1990. So he and I have driven to the beach, I'm thinking around 600 times. That's a lot. It's 2 hours to the beach from Portland. 2 hours up, 2 hours in the water, 2 hours back. That's thousands of hours. We've traveled all through Central America surfing and Mexico surfing. I've spent more time with him than anybody except my wife. Probably, maybe not more than my kids, but you get the point. Mickey has 2 kids, Aaron and Adam. Adam lives in Portland, he's married, has a family, attends church. Aaron is a prodigal. He's still a prodigal. At 18, he left home, grabbed his girlfriend, traveled the world for a few years, ended up in New Orleans. When Katrina hit in 2005, he left, ended up in San Francisco, works in high-end restaurants. And he's the prodigal. He's out there. He's been estranged from his parents for years. He would call every once in a while, and he came up for Mickey's 60th birthday. But he's out there. He got a letter. Mickey, my friend Mickey, got a letter from his son, Aaron, in November. And Mickey had been trying to call him for weeks. Tried his work. Didn't know if he was dead or alive. Didn't know if he was, he had been into drugs for a while and didn't know anything. But he got a letter from his son, and his son wrote him a letter and said, "Dad, I don't ever want you to contact me again. I don't ever want to have anything to do with you." And it had something to do with the way he was raised. And we're driving to the beach, and Mickey tells me this. You know what the sad part of that was? There's two obviously really sad things. One is that he's estranged from his son, and his son doesn't want to have anything to do with him anymore. The second thing is that I was the only person in Mickey's life that he could tell besides his wife. He didn't have anybody else that he could tell in his life that he could unburden himself to about the pain that he was feeling and the disappointment and the grief that he was feeling from his son. He didn't have anybody else, just me. And it's good that he had me, but he didn't have anybody at his church. And this is a guy with 2 seminary degrees. He's really well educated. I've known him for, 40-some years now. I have literally never heard him say a bad word about anybody in his life. And yet his son doesn't want to have anything to do with him. And what would he do if he didn't have me? I'm just saying I was available. What would he do if he didn't have me? My gosh. I had another friend, my friend Ed. I've known Ed 40 years. We went to Multnomah together. Served in the military for 30 years, and he's out now and lives back in Portland, retired in Portland. When he was going to Western Seminary, which I think, Joe, you went to Western? Anybody else go to Western here? I think somebody else. Anybody else? Okay. Went to Western Seminary. His wife was doing daycare and for a couple little girls. And I forget the exact series of circumstances, but one of the little girls accused Ed of molesting her. Now, what's the first thing you think of? That it must be true. I mean, these things don't come out of nowhere. But it wasn't true, and and Ed had to go to his church. But because I was his best friend, he came to me, and I knew Ed would not do something like that. But he had somebody to go to say, "Look, Bill, this could wreck my life. The police have come out," and it had a good ending. But fortunately, he had somebody that he could go, and we were young at the time. I mean, we were just I think we were in our mid to late 20s at the time, and this was new. It wasn't the epidemic that it was today. It was taken very seriously and everything. But what would you do if you didn't have anybody to go to? When somebody accuses you of something that serious? Boy, what would you do? And I'm glad I was there for him, and he's been there for me in things that I've gone through. If you read the Psalms, these men who wrote the Psalms, they lay their lives bare before God. They show their vulnerability. If you read Psalm 88 especially, my gosh, Psalm 88 is a cry of despair. It does not have a happy ending at all. These are men who wrote things. David, the sons of Korah, Asaph. They write these things, and they lay themselves before God, being vulnerable and asking questions and explaining to God the questions and the difficulties they're having trying to find answers. So one of the things that we need to think about in being in experiencing true community is this idea of being vulnerable. And it's opening ourselves up to risk. The second word is being authentic. Go to dictionary.com. You find out that authentic means being genuine and being real. So I served in a church once that had a wonderful pastor. Excuse me. A man full of integrity, great Bible teacher. But he was serving in a church that was on the downslope. And he'd been there 16 years. And churches have life cycles. Every church does. Every small group, business, marriage, your life. I'm 62. I'm, kind of getting down here. And he was on the downslope of a church that was literally dying. And he tried everything. And he just didn't realize that he needed to do something big or step aside and have somebody else come in. So he got really depressed. And he would weep during his sermons. And I'm not talking about the good weeping, where you're overcome and you shed tears. I've been known to shed a few tears during sermons because I get moved by what I'm saying and for the people I'm speaking to. Somebody asked me in our small group yesterday, well, I haven't cried yet, and I wanted to say, day's not over, just wait. So, and I felt bad for the guy. And so my wife, who is a great judge of character, says, Bill, you need to go talk to him. He was like self-loathing. He would say things like, I wonder if I should even be in the ministry. I can't, I'm not doing anything right. This is from the pulpit, and there's people listening to this. So I said, I've got to go talk to him. So I go talk to him, I knock on the door. I said, I won't use his name, but you would never know him anyway. I said, Bob. I said, Bob, we chit-chat, do the small talk thing, and I said, it seems to me you're just not doing well. And he said, well, what would make you think that? And I just gave up right then. And I said, so I gave him the list. Oh, no, well, I didn't mean that. Oh, no, I'm fine. And I just literally gave up. I said, I can't reach this guy. And surprise, surprise, it turned out that he'd spent the last 3 months looking for another church, and he was gone 2 months later. And that was good for him. 16 years in a place is a long time, and he deserved a chance at another church. But he would not be real with me. He would not be genuine. He would not take the veil away and say, yeah, I'm dying here. Can you help me? Because pastors, and I'm sure your pastor's perfect, right? He is. Right, Jeanette? Pastors sometimes, and guys, we do this too, we set ridiculous standards for ourselves. I can't tell anybody I'm hurting. I have to be the perfect father. I have to be the perfect husband. I have to be the perfect worker. I have to be the perfect, in my case, writer, missionary, speaker, whatever it is. I can't display any weakness because then, oh my gosh, what will people think of me? And imagine you're the pastor and you're standing up saying to your congregation, I am not doing well. I'm having difficulty. Our pastor does that. You know what he says? Excuse me. He says, me too. He says, me too. And I think that's why we've been able to develop an atmosphere in our church that, hey, we're just like you. We are just like you. Jesus has changed our life. We're on this journey where he is continually giving us strength and grace. But sometimes we take 3 steps forward, and sometimes we take 2 steps back. Let me see my next example. Oh, yeah, this is a great one. So I've been an elder in several churches. I don't really like it. I don't like dealing with budgets and, facilities and things like that. But because I have some wisdom in these things, I get asked to be elders, and I pray about it, and I usually say yes. I have said no in the past, but usually I say yes. So I'm on this elder board, and the pastor is trying to make the elder board like a small group. He wants it to be more than, well, let's deal with the budget, and let's deal with this, and let's deal with that, and here's my new program. And so we would usually share prayer requests and stuff like that, and there's 5 of us. And you can tell I'm a pretty open person. I just, I pretty much wear my life on my sleeves. That's just who I am. If we had a week together, you'd get to know me pretty well. And so I'm pretty open about my life. I share things, and, we would go around. We had one guy, and this is over several years, who would never share anything personal about himself. Never. When it come to him, he'd say, well, pray for my wife. She's not feeling well. Pray for my son. He's got this project at school he needs to get done next week. Seriously? Seriously? No, I'm saying this is true. Or pray for my one time it was, my rent's being raised and I'm being, and he's a millionaire. His rent's being raised $1,000 a month. I mean, come on, get real. Some of us are dying. You're talking about your rent being raised. He would never take the veil away and share anything. And he had some real deep-seated dad issues. His dad just ran him and then expected him to be perfect and set standards for him that were just ridiculous. Yet he never dealt with it, and he's a wonderful man, full of integrity, great family, but he just would not let us into his life. He would not let us open. He would not be real. And I have tried. I took him out to lunch, and just like the pastor I mentioned before, I really tried. Still trying to this day. But you know, you can't make people be authentic. You can't. You can't do it. One more. So our church was looking for a pastor about 5 years ago. We decided to reinvigorate our church, reinvent it. You know, we were dying. We were way down on our life cycle, 65 years, gray hair everywhere. You know, we got to do something. We're going to either sell the building, go somewhere else, or we're going to reach people for Jesus, go down swinging. So we bring in a guy who started churches before, Pastor Steve. Great guy, wonderful guy, a Me Too guy. I really like him. But before we got to him, he got kind of dropped in our lap. We're interviewing other guys, and if you've ever been on a search committee, you get a stack of, you go to Western, you go to Multnomah, you go to your denomination, they give you a stack of resumes, you spread them out amongst the search committee, which was the elder board, and I like this guy, and you get 5 or 6 you deal with. So we're dealing with them, and we found 5, and the interesting thing was, I'll say this in passing, then get to my point, we asked 4 of the guys, how do you grow a church? These are all pastors. They had no idea. Couldn't give a coherent answer on how to grow a church. At any rate. So we come to this young guy, 32 years old, great guy. He'd actually been involved in starting a church plant. He was an associate pastor of a church in California. And we're talking to him on the phone. There's we're not Skyping, but it's on speaker. So we have 5 elders, and we're talking to him. We're ready to get him a plane ticket and have him come up and candidate. And then he says, you need to know that this would have been like 7 years previously, I had a problem with pornography. He says, I wasn't found out, but I went to my pastor and I went to my wife and I confessed, and I have been in an accountable relationship with my pastor and my elders since then, and my wife knows, and I've been fine since then. And he knew we would find out. I mean, you know, we were going to talk to his pastor eventually, and his pastor should have, you know, told us that. Not that it was, you know, a big secret. This is pretty common nowadays, with the internet being so anonymous and everything. But we had one guy on the elder board that he could not get past this. He could not get past the fact that this guy had seen pictures of naked women in his past, and it was almost a disqualifier. And I said to the guy, I said, look, almost every guy we talked to, this guy admitted it, and he knew we were going to find out. I said, in my work with pastors, 80% of them, or a large percentage, and of all of us, have had difficulty in this area. All of us. It's a temptation that even if you don't do it, it is still a temptation, because you have a phone that within 5 seconds you can be looking at inappropriate images. Right? It's right there. Anytime you want. Nobody knows. You can erase the history. You can do whatever you want. Okay? And I said, this is not a disqualifier for me. The guy's being real. He's being authentic. But our friend just couldn't get over it, because he came from a time when that was the worst thing in the world you could do. It is still a terrible thing. Still a terrible thing. But at least the guy was honest and genuine with us. The next word I want to talk about is accountability. You know, this is kind of a buzzword today. We have accountability groups, we have accountability partners, but it is a good word. And the reason it's a good word is because your life is not your own. You know, we tend to think, especially in the Northwest, you know, we're very independent. You know, we're not very community-minded in the Northwest. You know, it's we're the last place to be settled in the United States. We still have some of the frontier mentality. We're just independent. I'm sure Seattle, you know, Washington's the same as Oregon. Leave me alone. Thank you. I'm self-sufficient. I don't need anybody. All that stuff. It's very different than like the South, where, you know, I go to Andy Stanley conferences every once in a while in Atlanta. He has a church down there, and you know, you go to a store, and it's somebody you don't even know will come up to you and say, oh, hi, where do you go to church? Where are you going to church tomorrow? I said, do I know you? I'm sorry, you're asking me where I'm going. Everybody goes to church in the South. In Oregon, go to church? What are you talking about? There are churches in Oregon? But you go to the South, and it's like, you know, you drive through Chick-fil-A. Howdy, sir, how are you? Here's your stuff. And where are you going to church tomorrow? I'm not kidding. My daughter lived in North Carolina for 3 years. It's a completely different culture. Your life is not your own. You belong to others. We'll deal with this more when we talk about 1 Corinthians 12. You have to let people have input into your life. When am I supposed to stop? I even forget when I started. Oh, gosh, I got to move along. So let me tell you a story about a pastor I worked with. He was an athlete in school, nationally ranked athlete. In his spare time, he coached college track. Great guy, very outgoing. And we had a girl in our church, I think she would have been 18 or 19 at the time, who worked for the Portland Trailblazers in the dance team. And she injured herself, so he was helping her rehab at the gym they both attended. I think it was 24-hour fitness. I got questions about that. Helping, it's in public, but I'm not sure about the wisdom of a 40-some-year-old guy helping a 19-year-old rehab a hamstring injury. That's a red flag for me. But he did, and so they're doing this, and they leave the gym one evening, early evening, and her car won't start. So he says, well, I'll drive you home. It's 15 minutes. Your dad can bring you back. I don't know about that. I don't know about the wisdom of getting in a car with a 19-year-old girl. I mean, at this point, everything is completely innocent, right? I mean, great motive, no problem. I might have done the same thing. No, I certainly would not. No, I would not. So the next thing, they're driving along, and I forget how he described it to me, but he made a move to touch like her hamstring. She's sitting right there, and she recoiled like this. And he realized, oh my gosh, I have just crossed some line. And she said, stop the car, let me out, I'll walk home. And he had to calm her down, and everything was completely innocent, but he was going to touch her bare leg, and they'd both been working out. And so he takes her home, and he's thinking, oh my gosh, is she going to tell her parents? And she calmed down. First thing he did was, what did he do? He called me. He said, Bill, I need to talk to you right now. I said, fine. So we met at church, and he said, I've never done anything like this before, and I'm scared to death. I have to tell somebody about this. What should I do? And all I did was I grabbed his hand, and I wept with him, and I cried. He cried, and we prayed. And then he had to go over and talk to the parents about it. But why did he come to me? Because we had a relationship. And that relationship since then has deepened. And I meet with him at least once a month, though we don't go to the same church anymore. I meet with him at least once a month for this exact issue. Now I don't have it with me. Y'all know Randy Alcorn, he's a famous writer. Yeah, I went to school with Randy. It's my one claim to fame. He was my roommate at Multnomah. He has a list of the anticipated consequences of immoral behavior. I keep that list on my desk because I travel a lot, and I've been propositioned in Manila and in Taiwan and in other places. A single white guy. I go for walks every day, and in Manila I was kind of scared walking outside, so I would walk in malls, and I've had usually ladies, not men, come up and say, no, I mean, usually you think of the pimps as guys. Well, these were older ladies saying, propositioning me, saying, do you want me to meet a girlfriend? And I said, no, thanks. Same in Taiwan, the airport, same exact thing. But, I am paranoid about this. I've been married 41 years. I've been faithful to my wife every single day. This late in my life, the odds of me ever doing anything are really very low, but I just don't believe it. I take care of myself. I travel a lot. I'm never in rooms with ladies alone, and I'm just in relationships with a bunch of guys that help me be accountable for my behavior. Let me mention another thing, prayer. Prayer is where I think we bring Jesus into our community when we pray and we make that the center. So this book called Miracle Man, I wrote about prayer. I was always, I got to say this the right way so you don't think I'm a heretic. I wondered why God doesn't answer more of my prayers, for people, for things, for my ministry. I wonder why God doesn't do that. It seems he answers no or wait more than yes, doesn't it? At least to me it does. So when I come up with a moral dilemma, I write a book. So this book is about a pastor, that's what I know, who's struggling with this issue of prayer and how God doesn't, and when he does, he answers prayer unexpectedly. And it throws his whole world upside down. This is how we get Jesus integrated in our community. Let me mention another thing. You cannot have a deep relationship with more than 1, 2, 3, or 4 people. You just can't do it. It's okay to have surface relationships. It's okay to not, when somebody says, how are you doing? It's okay to say fine. You don't have to say, oh my gosh, I'm drowning at work. My wife just doesn't understand me. My kids won't leave me alone. That's okay. You can just say fine, I'm okay. You should have somebody else that you can go to and say, my wife doesn't understand me. My kids won't leave me alone. I'm drowning at work. I don't feel good. My throat hurts. I don't surf as much as I used to. Things like that. It's okay to have, surface relationships because you can't have deep relationships with everybody. But you should have relationships where you can say those things that I mentioned with somebody. Now, the other thing is sometimes these relationships don't end well. It's just a fact of life that relationships sometimes don't end well. Let me give you an illustration. So you have Paul and Barnabas in Acts chapter 13. They're going on the first missionary journey. They're commissioned by the church at Antioch to go out, and they go to all these different places. They're persecuted. Paul is stoned. You can imagine them walking and praying and ministering together, the bond they're developing. They're great buddies. They have Barnabas' cousin, John Mark, traveling with them for a while. And they're out for months, and then they come back. And they report to the church in Acts 15 how the Gentiles respond to the gospel, and it's great, and we're going to go back again. And Paul says, let's go visit these people. Let's find out how they're doing. We just don't want to leave them hanging out there. So let's go find out how they're doing. Barnabas says, great, let me go get my cousin John Mark. Paul says, forget that. He deserted us. Don't you remember? When things got rough, John Mark went back to Jerusalem. We're not doing that. Or he went back to Antioch, I forget. But he deserted him. And Barnabas says, no, he won't do that again. He's my cousin. Blood's thicker than water, etc., etc., etc. Paul says, no. Barnabas says, yes. Paul says, no. Barnabas says, yes. And Luke writes that their disagreement was so sharp that they stopped being buddies. These are two guys who had been persecuted, who had been stoned, who had prayed together, who had wept together, who had preached together, spent months on the road developing this bond. And what happens? It's gone. You don't think they could have resolved that? God used it. He uses our mistakes. But it's an example that there is risks in developing relationships. They don't always end well. And there have been times when my wife and I have wanted to walk away from church. So I wrote this book. See how I'm plugging all my books? Isn't this fun? I am a selfish person, I admit. I wrote this book called Professional Christian, which chronicles my journey through 7 different churches. My wife and I have had some difficult church experiences. Some of them my fault, but not all. And that at one point if I'd have said to my wife at one point after one experience, we're done with church, she would have said fine. Because there was a time in the early 90s when my kids were teenagers, my oldest daughter got pregnant through an association with a guy who turned out to be a criminal who was going to threaten to kill our family. And there was a time, you can talk to me later about it, when I was literally sitting with a rifle on my lap in my kitchen waiting for him to come because he said he was going to steal my daughter and her new baby, my grandchild, from us. And that's how bad it was. But the problem was I couldn't get any help from my church. Well, I went to the associate pastor. My wife went to the youth pastor. We begged. We were drowning. Throw us a lifeline. And it was like we were pariahs because our child had gone off the deep end and gotten pregnant, through a series of circumstances that we didn't understand, some of which was her fault, but more she got taken advantage of by a guy who was older than her, who did some terrible things to her. And so we were drowning, and my wife was so disgusted by it all. If I'd have said, dear, we're done with church, she'd have said, fine. Now, we didn't do that because we love Jesus, but we left that church and we spent 2 years cooling out in another church. And then it took every ounce of emotional energy we had to get involved in the current church where we've been at 17 years, which has been a wonderful experience. So I had all these bad experiences, and then finally we hit a church where God opened up a big ministry. Hey, that's why I'm here. Because God sent us to this church and opened up this ministry. But there was a time I was ready to walk away. And by the way, did I have anybody in my life at the time that I could tell all that to? No. All my friends were gone that I had. I had nobody in a small group. And we even lost some friends who wouldn't let their kids hang out with my kids because they didn't want to be infected by my kids' bad behavior. Now, right now, my kids are all following Jesus. They all go to church. The daughter who had that had some struggles for many years, but now goes to our church with her family. Son goes to a different church in Portland, and my daughter lives in California, goes to a evangelical Lutheran church. So they're all doing well, but they didn't really begin to follow Jesus till their 20s. One more illustration, then I'll be done. And this is all under the title of Sometimes Things Don't End Well. So I had a friend who ran a Christian bookstore in Portland. We're unfortunately probably not going to get through some of this, unless you want me to go over. So I had a friend who ran the largest Christian bookstore in Portland. Now, Christian bookstores are dying, you know. Have you heard of Amazon, by the way? You know? Hey, Amazon Prime right here. You know, I buy used books on Amazon all the time. I have a Kindle. Whatever's the cheapest, that's what I get. Because I read, I travel a lot, so I'm constantly got my nose in a book. So I love Amazon. Book's a book to me. I don't care if it's used. I don't care if it's on Kindle. I don't really care. Book's a book to me. But Christian bookstores are pretty much dying. His is gone. But I knew this guy for 25 years. And so I'm not going to mention the book, though you might be able to guess it. This book came out maybe 10, 15 years ago, and it was a very popular book, and we read it in our church, some of us, and it was a great book. And so I'm having lunch with him one day, and we tried to have lunch once a month, usually on my instigation. And I have found that if I'm the one that has to keep the relationship going and has to instigate the lunches and the meet, it's probably not going to last. I found that out if there's not reciprocity involved. So I go to him and I said, we're talking, and I said something about this book, and he goes, well, that book's heresy. And he didn't carry it in his bookstore. He also wouldn't carry the Living Bible, which he considered heresy. But at any rate, that's another story. And he's humping it, and this is the first I'd heard of this. And I go, and I said these words. Well, have you read it? That was the end of our friendship right there. He had never read the book. He was just going by what other people had said, and I embarrassed him. And that was the end of our friendship. He never called me again. And it was like a chill descended in the room. And since then, I've tried to make contact with him. I've sent him my books, letters. And he got real sick and had to retire and sell his bookstore and all that stuff. But I lost him. It was very sad. But this is the risk involved if you're going to develop relationships that are authentic and vulnerable and accountable. If Paul and Barnabas couldn't make it work, you may have a time in your life when you're in a relationship with somebody that is not going to work. Don't give up. I almost did. I came close to giving up. But because I love Jesus, He rescued me from that and opened the doors to me to travel the world telling people about Him, dealing with pastors, getting to speak to you guys. I deal with people almost every single day, mainly through Skype now. Thank goodness for Skype, boy. Counseling, mentoring, and just encouraging guys all over the world. That if you'd have told me, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I'd be doing that, I would have said, look at what just happened to me. Excuse me? You know, I'm in the wilderness here. Yet God was gracious to me because I knew He could do something. And I got in these relationships with guys that could help me build into my life. And He's given me guys that I could build into their life. So I think we're about, where's Warren? We about done? Okay, good. Let me ask this. Do you have any questions or comments? Usually I'm used to doing interaction, but I know you have small groups afterwards, and some of the questions are designed to explore some of these topics. So let me just pray, and then we'll break up into your small groups, and you can do that. Lord, we all love you. We're at varying places in our journey with you. We're at various places in our relationship with you. But I really believe that our desire is to know you better, to experience your love and your grace in our life. And we confess that sometimes you've been invisible to us, that you're there and you're knocking at that door and you want us to open it. But we just kind of drift away into our sports, into our families, and into our work. So I pray for this group, and for me especially, that I would find ways to tell people something about you, how great you are, how wonderful you are, how magnificent you are, how you heal our hurts, how you fill up our lives with goodness and joy and blessing. And I pray that as we continue this day, we're going to have fun in the afternoon, we're going to talk in small groups, that we would integrate you into this, into our lives, into our fun, into our swimming, into our zip lining, into our go-karts, even into our eating. And I thank you for the guys who put this together, who led us in worship. It's been a lot of fun. We pray your continued blessing on us. In Jesus' name, amen. Mm-hmm. Let me mention one other thing. I'm going to set some books up back there. If you're a staff member here, which means you get a check from the church, you feel free to take each one of the 3 books for free. The other ones are $7. That's my cost. Okay? You look at them. If you want to buy them, that's great. Just make a check out. Make a check out to Foundations Global. That's my ministry, and that'll be used for my travel expenses. I like the verse, freely you have received, freely give. So, at any rate, there you go.